Welcome. I want to welcome everyone to the second session of the North American Green Funders Forum, our new North American focused peer network at JFN for climate funders. We are very pleased today to be joined by John Foley from Project Drawdown, and we will spend most of our hour getting to hear from and speak with him. We're also very fortunate to have Daniela Hirschfeld joining us as moderator for this session. And before we dive into the centerpiece of this session, we felt it was really important to acknowledge the situation in the Los Angeles area. We know that the wildfires have impacted members, have impacted Jewish communities, and countless others who we are watching struggle and concerned about and interested in supporting. And Tzivia has been doing amazing work reaching out to our members and learning about both needs and resources and strategies for supporting folks. And we really just wanted to give Tzivia Schwartz Getzug, our JFN colleague and director of JFN West, the opportunity to share some of her observations and insights from the area. So Tzivia, I want to turn things over to you.
Great, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Tzivia Schwartz Getzug. I live in Los Angeles. I actually live in the flats of Sherman Oaks. So we were out of power for a few days. We had our bags packed, but we were really one of the very lucky ones that did not have to evacuate and were not really severely impacted by the fires. But I'm guessing that just about everybody on this call either knows somebody or themselves, and I know there are some of you on here, were severely impacted. I want to give you a couple examples. My friend Rhoda was out having coffee with a friend when she got the call, couldn't get back to the house, told her partner to grab her medication and her favorite necklace, and the whole house was lost. Emily was at a client meeting, had to hitchhike down Pacific Coast Highway to get to the hillside under her home, climbed up it to get to her baby and nanny, and then spent 2 hours trying to drive out of Pacific Palisades. Their home was lost. Our dear friends, Sonia and James is, I believe, on the call, lost their beautiful home. They can tell you more about their experience. Heidi lost a home. Randy and his family lost several homes, including his grandfather, composer Arnold Schoenberg's archive. All three rabbis at Kilat Israel Synagogue in the Palisades lost their homes, but miraculously, the synagogue still stands. The Pasadena Jewish Center and Synagogue was destroyed by the fire, and the home of our friend Rabbi Joshua Levine Grader lost his home as well. So as I know all of you have heard, for the Jewish community, climate change is not a priority, but we know, in fact, for these folks and for all of us, it is. That's why all of you are here, obviously. Let me just share a few statistics with you, just to give you a sense of what we're talking about. I'm going to share my screen here. And sorry, one second. And here we go. So this is a headline actually from just yesterday. Climate change made LA fires worse, scientists say. We know that. Sorry. So these are some of the statistics. We basically had 4 fires, 3 in the LA area and 1 in the San Diego area. This as of yesterday. The fires in the Palisades and the Eaton fire started on the 7th of January. 23,000 acres. Oops, sorry. 23,000 acres, 14,000 acres. Thankfully, they're both now 95 and 99% contained. The Hughes fire, 10,000 acres, 98% contained, and down in San Diego, 6,000 acre border 2 fire, 74%. Just to give you a sense of the geography, these are the LA fires, Hughes, Eaton, and the Palisades, and here's the San Diego fire. This is as of yesterday. There were more fires that popped up along the way and may continue as well, but these are the ones that were still burning yesterday. This is a look at the structure damage in the Palisades. All of the red squares are for homes that were destroyed 50% or more. And then the ones in black were not affected, and everything in between was. And you can see the extraordinary extent of the damage. This is the Eaton fire, where the Pasadena synagogue and the Pasadena, our friend Rabbi Joshua Levine Grader lost his home. I want to share with you a clip from chief of the county fire department, who had some very honest words to share about the cause of the fire and prevention in the future.
Yeah, I'll keep my answer short. I just wanted to speak to the LA County Fire Department on that question, how do we prevent this from happening again? And that's going to be very, very difficult because we've had a lot of discussion and there's been a lot of review about the number of fire engines, the number of firefighters, how long did it take to get on scene? Did you have water or didn't you have water? What we experienced here was a community conflagration. Much like Lahaina, the Marshall Fire in Colorado when there was snow on the ground and fire moved from house to house, or Paradise in Northern California. What was different this time is that a community conflagration occurred in a metropolitan area. LA City and LA County Fire. Over 200 fire stations. We have 9,000 firefighters in the Los Angeles County area between the 29 departments. The challenge now, like Chief Hudson said, is going to be to build fire-wise communities. It's to make sure that when we rebuild, which will occur, that those structures are standalone, that a firefighter or a fire engine is not going to need to be at your home for it to survive. We need to make sure that defensible space is appropriate and that it's enough. And lastly, due to climate change, we need to manage our wildfire ecosystem. What we've essentially done in Los Angeles County is remove fire from the natural environment. When the native First Peoples were here, the fires burned in these hills. And they even had cultural burns. We now no longer allow fire to propagate naturally. So when it occurs under 100-mile-an-hour winds or 70-mile-an-hour winds, it is impossible for Chief Crowley's firefighters or for my firefighters to put that fire out. And this event was different. I've never seen fire behavior like that in 39 years. This incident is going to go down as the most destructive fire incident in the history of Los Angeles County. We would love to be able to stop it next time, but I don't want to lie to you. It's going to be very difficult unless we change a couple of important things. So thank you for understanding that. Thank you.
I want to just end by reminding you that 25% of the Jewish community in Los Angeles lives in the West Side area where the Palisades and Brentwood are. The response has been incredible, and we can share a lot more about that at a later date. But the Federation in particular has raised a significant amount of funds. They've already given away $500,000 to $1 million in grants to communities in need, both Jewish and non-Jewish. And it's something that we are taking very seriously, not only as a Jewish community, but as part of the broader community. So let me stop there. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer. But thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, if folks do not have questions at this moment, we can certainly circle back at the end of the session. And I hope that everyone had a chance to see Civia's interview in E-Jewish Philanthropy that ran after the fires, that also talked about both the impact and some of the ways that communities are rallying and funders are rallying to show support. And thank you so much, Tzivia, just for giving us some some perspective on the impact. I really appreciate you joining us, and obviously this is a story that will continue to follow as it unfolds and as the needs become clearer and change over time. And I think that clip did such a lovely job of making some of the necessary connections to issues around climate. So I want to make sure that we are reserving the time needed to delve more deeply into those issues today, the broader issues around strategies for accelerating climate solutions. And I want to take a moment to that end to welcome our moderator for today, Daniela Hirschfeld. I'm gonna add you. There you are. Hi, Daniela. Daniela
Hi.
is Assistant Professor of Climate Adaptation Planning and Urban Ecology and Environmental Justice at Utah State University. And she is also a climate funder in her own right, which she will share a little bit about. And I discovered in speaking with Daniela recently that she has actually taught the Drawdown Roadmap Framework that John will be sharing about in her courses. So we didn't even know that when we invited you. But it's lovely to know that that this is also part of the way that you think about and teach about climate change mitigation. So thank you so much for joining us, and I will give you the floor.
My pleasure. It's really wonderful to be here as both a professor of environmental planning and a funder of climate and environmental work in the Jewish community. And I want to say that I know Tzivia said that environmental and climate work was not Jewish people's top priority. And I would actually say that I've been shocked by how many Jewish people do fund in this space and how much work has been going on. I'm on the board of Adama, and we have a really robust giving space. And it may not be the top priority, but I certainly see it quite a large Jewish community that is funding. And I think this room, this Zoom room, really speaks to that as well. So, and I just thank you so much for sharing about the challenges in Los Angeles. As somebody whose work focuses on climate adaptation, so much of what I think about is we are going to have profound impacts from climate change, and we need to do better to be prepared. And I think the fire chief really spoke to that, of saying, here's all the things that we need to be doing because we're not going to stop fires from happening. which is also to say we want to do our absolute best in everything we can to mitigate climate change, to bring down greenhouse gas emissions. And John Foley's work really is all about that. So I want to acknowledge there are some like things in the chat, so we'll make sure to get to those things in the chat. But I want to turn the time over to John Foley. John Foley is a world-renowned environmental scientist, sustainability expert, author, and public speaker, and he is currently the executive director of Project Drawdown. So I'm going to turn the floor over to you, John, and look forward to your presentation.
Well, thank you so much for the kind introduction, Daniela. And it's so wonderful to have you here and all of you here today to talk about obviously a very pressing issue. And I think all of our hearts go out to folks in the Los Angeles area and throughout the world who are experiencing firsthand the already early effects of climate change. So my presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit today, and we'll have a more robust Q&A and conversation later. We'll be talking a bit more about how we can slow down and stop the additional climate change kind of in the pipeline. So we not only have to adapt to the world around us, we have to prevent it from getting much, much worse. And so that's going to be what we're talking about a little bit today. So let me throw up some slides and I'll share a little presentation with you, and there'll be plenty of time for questions later, but please throw some in the chat. I won't see them, but they'll come in at the end. I'm sure Danielle will see them too. Gosh, I don't know really what to say about the first part of 2025, other than I read my Dickens and remember that history is often full of conflicting forces. We have forces that pull us into maybe a better direction for the future and forces that pull us in very dark directions. And they often occur at the same time. And I believe history is sometimes a race between two different futures. And it's often up to us to write that future. But it's clear, once again, there are a lot of different things happening in the world, some pretty awful and some really incredibly inspiring and beautiful. I don't know what to make of that, but I know which future I want, and I bet I know which future you want too. But when it comes to climate change, we really do have two very different futures being presented to us, at least in the extreme examples. We have a world that could be completely undermined by our own actions, just by climate change alone, let alone all the other things happening in the world. And we are seeing already the early signs of this. Now imagine it exponentially worse, happening all over the world routinely. That's a future that could be incredibly bleak and not just bad for the environment, but as we see in Los Angeles and elsewhere, very bad for people and other things that we care about. But I also believe another future is possible too, that we might have a future out there where we solve the problem of climate change and we actually not only address climate change, we end up making the world a lot better in the process. We create jobs that can't be outsourced or done by AI. We create more healthy and secure communities. We create more prosperous and equitable neighborhoods and cities around the world. And in the process of stopping climate change, we actually invent a world more just, more equitable, more prosperous, and more just beautiful than anything we've ever seen before. So I get up every morning, and I bet you do too, kind of deciding to do what I can today to help win that race. And I really do believe that we can. So today I want to talk about three things we might need to do to help win that race. None of that's guaranteed. We don't know which future we'll get. Anybody who tells you they know is really trying to sell you something. But I think the possibilities exist for a lot of different futures, and we can focus on ways to make better ones happen. And today I want to talk about three things that we need to build a better future, in my opinion. So one of those things is, I believe, science. Well, I am a scientist. So this is a little bit biased, but I'm going to make the case that science is helpful sometimes. In the area of climate change, science is very helpful. In fact, it helped identify the problem in the first place. If it weren't for science, we wouldn't really know that an invisible gas building up in the atmosphere was subtly warming the planet every year. And that over the course of a century or two, it's built up enough to be really noticeable. But if it weren't for scientists, we'd have no idea what's causing it. We'd really have no clue, let alone focusing on the solutions. And science identified this problem probably a lot earlier than you thought. Most people I talk to think, oh, maybe, did Al Gore discover global warming? He said he did, but not really. In the 1950s, maybe somebody did. Was it in the 1940s? When did we discover the idea of climate change and global warming, for example? Well, it turns out when I was in grad school, I was told it was a British scientist named Joseph Tyndall. Turns out that wasn't true. It was an American woman in the 1850s, in 1853, named Eunice Foote, Foote. She actually wrote the first paper on Earth showing that building up CO2 in the atmosphere actually trapped heat and warmed the planet. But as a woman in science in the 19th century, her work was never got any attention. She really never got credit for it. And it was kind of co-opted by the history books and given the credit to Tyndall. Tyndall didn't first publish this. He did it several years later. He also, ironically, was killed by his wife later by poison. No connection, I'm sure. But anyway, Eunice Foote was only rediscovered as the kind of first scientist to talk about this about maybe 10 to 20 years ago. So I like to help correct that historical wrong and mention her name because she talked about this literally in the 1850s, probably 100 years before most people expected it. But here we are now in the 21st century, and we know what the problem is, and we need to now focus instead on solutions. Well, here again, science can help us because right now we have a world where a lot of people who have no idea what they're talking about are shouting really loudly and somehow telling us they're the experts of everything. Just look at our government, look at Silicon Valley, look at Wall Street. There are a lot of people out there who really never done their homework, who are suddenly an expert on everything, on cable news or on social media, whatever. And just listening to the person who's the most charming or shouts the loudest isn't always the wisest course of action. Science can tell us what the right answers are and what the wrong answers are. It can show us what we need to do and where we need to focus. So I just want to give you a little bit of background that might help you focus as philanthropist and maybe where you might want to direct your resources around climate change to make sure they line up with, the facts and evidence. The fact is that climate change is a multifaceted problem, and the emissions of greenhouse gases, the stuff that's building up the atmosphere, causing climate change, comes from a lot of different places. And so we're going to have to do a lot of different things to solve the problem. One of the things that people are familiar with, of course, is electricity. We know that making electricity, burning coal or natural gas, for example, is one of the areas that produces greenhouse gases, about a quarter of the greenhouse gases on Earth today. People are also, though, surprised to learn that the food system, mainly deforestation, methane burped from cattle and from rice fields and other things, but also fertilizer use also emits a lot of greenhouse gases, roughly the same as the world's electricity in total. We also have industry making stuff and dealing with waste. So things like concrete and steel and glass and plastic emit a lot of greenhouse gases in their production. But also landfills and wastewater treatment produce a lot of greenhouse gases in our waste disposal systems. Then we have transportation, cars and trucks and airplanes and boats and everything else. We have buildings on top of the electricity they consume and on top of the stuff they're made out of, which is counted in the electricity sector and the industry sector, respectively. Buildings also emit even more greenhouse gases down in the basement. Things like water heaters and furnaces and boilers that run on natural gas, for example. And then we have energy processing, taking like crude oil and turning it into things we actually use, like gasoline, jet fuel, kerosene, diesel, things that we have to refine. But also fugitive emissions of things like methane, kind of accidental emissions of greenhouse gases from mines and wells and pipelines and so on. So to solve climate change, we're going to have to look at like about 6 major areas for cutting these greenhouse gas emissions: electricity, food, stuff and waste, transportation, buildings, and processing energy itself. Okay, we got to get to work. And science can actually double click on this and give us a lot more insights into the very specific areas we want to look at. I know these fonts are too small probably to read. I can send these slides to you later, though, if you want to study them. But this shows the exact kind of economic sectors we have to address. And there are about 50 to 100 of them here, where we have to really get to work on many, many, many different fronts. So science shows us what we need to do and also which solutions are most effective. That's the kind of work that I do at a place called Project Drawdown. Others do some work in this space too, but we're really kind of the leading resource at drawdown.org of solutions to climate change. we actually study all of the proposed solutions to climate change and look for the scientific and engineering and economic evidence that they actually work. So we're kind of like a consumer reports for the planet on climate change. We look at all the proposed solutions to, let's say, solving the electricity emissions. These are the ones that made it. Things like wind and solar and hydro and nuclear, but also energy conservation, like better lighting, more efficient buildings, more efficient industries, things that could save electricity, but also produce electricity without pollution. We also have solutions in food and agriculture, mainly shifting our diets, um, producing less food waste, protecting forest, farming a lot better. All of these kinds of solutions, many, many solutions are needed here too. And then overall, we've actually identified about 100 solutions that if we took them in total, would be enough actually to stop climate change. And they're here today. And more solutions are coming down the pipeline as more technologies and more practices become more effective over time. So this is a practical toolbox that we actually do have today. We don't have to wait. No miracles are needed to stop climate change. We just have to deploy what we already have, and it could actually work. And the science also tells us not only what's effective, but a lot of these are very, very affordable. That's one of the arguments against climate action. You're going to hear it a lot in the US Trump administration that we can't afford to do this. It's too expensive. It's just, starry-eyed, idealistic green people that are talking about climate solutions. Now, that's not true. This is a good business case too. If we actually do the economics and look at the net cost of climate solutions over, let's say, 20 to 30 years, it turns out that about 80% of the climate solutions we've looked at are cheaper than what we do today. For example, solar panels are cheaper than burning coal or gas for electricity. It's cheaper to buy an EV and own it over time, even without tax breaks, than owning a gas-powered car over the long run because of repair cost and fuel cost and everything else. And soon, especially in China, EVs will be cheaper to make and sell than traditional gas cars. A lot fewer moving parts, a lot easier to build. So again and again, all of these solutions in the green area that we've color coded here, these are ones that are cheaper than the world we have today, 80% of the time. Now, to be fair, 20% of the climate solutions we'll need are probably a little more expensive than what we do today. We'll either have to subsidize those or just deal with the cost of those, or we need more R&D to innovate cheaper solutions than what we have now. But overall, solving climate change is the biggest business opportunity probably in human history. And on top of that, it helps us save a planet from ruin, which is infinitely beneficial to the economy. So the economic argument is very strong that we should do something with climate change. So climate science has helped us figure out the what we need to do, like what works and what does it cost. But we also need to talk about the how. And there are a few principles here that I really think philanthropists in particular need to keep in mind as you think about the things you might want to invest in. One of those things is not only that solutions should be effective and cheap, they should also be fast and ready to go right now. Otherwise, they're not even here for the problem. Because we are in a race against time. We are at that red dot right now, showing on the red curve the greenhouse gas emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere every year. Right now, we put about 55 to 60 billion tons of CO2 equivalent pollution into the atmosphere, adding to climate change, as CO2, methane, and a bunch of other gases. We have to cut that down towards zero as quickly as possible. If we acted now to cut emissions in the next 10 years, let's say, by this much, we've prevented all of that blue area from ever being emitted into the atmosphere. That's a huge part of the solution set that we need towards the middle of the century. We can cut emissions again, maybe the next decade and the decade after that, and we might be able to remove a little bit of carbon in the future if we're lucky. But the longer we wait, the less time these solutions have to work. These solutions build up their impact over time. They're cumulative. In math, we call it a integral, the area under the curve. That's what's important. The best analog I can think of is financial investing. In investing, which I'm not an investor, don't ever ask me for financial advice, but I've been told when I save for my retirement that there's something called the time value of money, When I put money in early, when I was in my 20s, it sits in the bank and earns a bunch of interest and builds up over time. I do it again in my 30s, my 40s, my 50s, but the longer I wait, the less capital will be built, right? The time value of money. Well, there's a time value of carbon too. Early investments pay off handsomely in the long run. Waiting to invest in climate solutions, just like waiting to invest in retirement, is the worst thing to do. Put your money into things that work now. Don't wait for high-tech solutions that may arrive someday in the future. I love what Bill Gates tries to do sometimes, but his solutions are often the worst kinds of solutions. I'm not trying to personalize it, but as a symbol of kind of high-tech approaches, waiting for those solutions is exactly the wrong thing to do. Waiting 20, 30 years for fusion or carbon capture machines, even if they do arrive, they arrive too late. What we need to do is focus on immediate solutions, what I like to call emergency brakes, things that can bend the curve now and make a big difference today, and keep on making that difference every year for the next few decades. That buys us some time for new infrastructure to be built, for new nature-based solutions to kick in, like new forests, new soils, and also a little bit of time for new technologies to finally mature and finish off the last part of the job. But if we don't do early action, the high-tech solutions of the future won't even matter because the world will have been ruined already. We have to act now. Like in Los Angeles, we don't wait for some tech bro to come along and say, I'll disrupt the fire suppression technologies. You grab the water you have right now. It is literally an emergency. So time is very important. At Drawdown, we often say time is more important than tech. Now is better than new. So while we do need to invest in technology and R&D, that should be a small part of our overall portfolio. Most of our resources need to go to immediate, practical, here today solutions. But we also need to focus the where of climate action, not just the when, and focus on the right places. Science and new data sets are helping. Big data and even machine learning can help us figure out where to pinpoint our interventions. For example, we now have satellites that can actually detect plumes of pollution from kind of super polluters, like an oil refinery that may occasionally, when they don't think anybody's looking, plume out a whole bunch of methane pollution, which contributes to climate change in a really serious way, or maybe a burst pipeline or an abandoned well. Well, this data from satellites is public. It's not government or not corporate. It's actually a nonprofit that did this. And we can name and shame the big polluters in real time and pinpoint exactly who's causing these problems and hopefully go there and shut it down. We can also track deforestation around the planet down to the local level everywhere in the world every single day. The power of kind of data to pinpoint where on Earth we should intervene is incredible. So not only can we be much more focused on the right time for climate solutions today, we can also focus on the right places and guide our actions to be way more impactful than just kind of doing it evenly across the Earth. And finally, another thing we should keep in mind for our climate solutions work is that climate solutions can do way more than just prevent greenhouse gas emissions. It can do way more than stop climate change. It turns out climate solutions are really good for us, especially for people, even if they didn't do anything else. These are important solutions. Now, why is that? Well, one example is, think about this. When we burn fossil fuels, that's the single biggest contributor to climate change, building up CO2 and other things in the atmosphere, warming the planet. But burning fossil fuels is also one of the biggest contributors to air pollution that we breathe, the kind of particulate matter and soot and smoke and kind of tropospheric ozone and other things that we breathe in our lungs. So it turns out the air pollution from fossil fuels kills about 8 to 9 million people a year on this planet right now, today. 8 to 9 million a year. That's more than all the people in the world who die from smoking, from guns, and warfare combined. This is the single deadliest thing happening on the planet today, and we never even talk about it. So if we can stop fossil fuels, we not only solve a big climate problem, we also have the single largest advance in human health on the planet right in the front of us. And most of the people who die from fossil fuel air pollution, these are premature deaths, dying far earlier than they should be. Most of the people who are experiencing this are poor and vulnerable peoples around the world who really deserve our help. So I think that climate action is not just for the climate, it's for all of us. That climate solutions create jobs, they improve health, they improve security, they also help the rest of nature if we do them right. So we get kind of a multiplier effect from climate action and do things that touch all of our lives. At the beginning, I heard somebody mention that, that climate funding isn't always the top priority. It isn't in any community. Climate funding is usually a small part of overall philanthropy, overall investing, and overall government action, to be sure. But if we can pitch climate solutions, say, hey, not only does this help climate change, it improves health and creates jobs, maybe we can bring more people to the table and build a bigger tent. I'll talk about that once more in a second. But the pillars of climate action we need to keep in mind from science, and as you think about your philanthropy and investing, is that we should do things that have strong evidence bases. So make sure to listen to scientists like, does this work? Is there data to support this? Does this make sense? Because there's a lot of climate philanthropy going into a lot of nonsense right now, as well as some good stuff. And people in the science community can help you tell the difference. Is it cost effective? Is it something we can afford to do? Is it fast? Is it ready to go? Are we targeting the solution to the right and most effective places? And are they giving other benefits to people besides just addressing climate change? Well, if we did all these things, we have a narrow window of opportunity to still address climate change and build a better world. And I think we can still win this race for the future if we listen to the science. But science isn't the only thing and hardly the most important thing in addressing our biggest problems, but it is important. I'll mention very briefly now, wrapping up, two other things I think we need besides good science to guide us, but we also need to be inspired. And I think we need more dreams to inspire us because right now, I don't know about you, but I feel most days listening to the news that we're stuck in kind of a nightmare of our own making, a nightmare of anxiety and polarization and bickering that our politicians and media outlets and our activists and yes, ourselves have created for ourselves. But we didn't have to do that, and we don't have to follow it. Because in the real world, we're actually not nearly as divided as the politicians and the media tell us we are. For example, in climate change in the United States, for example, but this is true in most of Europe and a lot of other countries too, it turns out that in the US, 70 to 90% of Americans actually already believe climate change is real. It's not divided neatly 50-50 between Republicans and Democrats or red or blue or whatever. That's not true at all. That's not where the disconnect is. The disconnect is in how we address it and how we talk about it. And also the fact that most people in the US, but also in other countries like the US, most people don't see climate change as a top issue. While most people accept climate change is real and they're kind of worried about it, when you ask Americans, for example, what's a top issue facing the country, climate and the environment never register more than 1 or 2%. But other things do, like jobs, security, health, inflation, communities, equity, justice, all sorts of issues that are related to climate concern people, but climate change itself is kind of in the back burner. How do we change this conversation? Well, I think what we need to do is stop talking only about problems because that makes people afraid. Instead, talk about solutions where people lean in and start to think with their frontal cortex, not the amygdala in their brain that freaks people out. And instead of talking about climate, climate, climate all the time, why don't we meet people where they are, where their concerns are? People in Los Angeles may not care about climate change, but they sure care about fires in neighborhoods right now. Let's talk about neighborhoods. Let's talk about safety and health. Let's talk about jobs. Let's talk about inflation. Let's talk about security and show how climate solutions actually can help everyday people with everyday concerns. That we are, instead of telling the 98% of people who don't think climate change is a top issue, you're wrong. You should believe the 2% of us who do believe it's a top issue. That's a losing strategy. Let's go meet the 98% where they are and ask how we can help them. And climate solutions turn out to be great advocates for a lot of the things they care about too. Things like health and the economy and jobs. So let's go do that. But also, I think we also have to show that a better future is possible. It's not really easy to fight for a world that we all believe is going to hell. Instead, maybe we could showcase dreams of a better future and invite other people to join in building it. I remember Martin Luther King, he didn't go around America saying, I have a nightmare. He talked about dreams of a better future that he tried to envision and shared with us, and he invited all of us to help him try to build it. He died for that dream, and we're still far from achieving it, but he ignited a spark that has changed the world and moving us slowly, I think, maybe in the right direction. And finally, between science and dreams, we need one last thing, and that's all of you, heroes and heroines across the country, across the world. Not the heroes with capes in a movie, not our elected officials, not the titans of industry, but everyday people, all of us, who may be just ordinary people who are doing extraordinary things. Because I actually believe an incredible world is still within reach for us. There is a future out there that is possible if we choose to build it. That is incredible and better than anything we've ever seen before. A world that generations and generations have dreamed of having the opportunity to build. We actually could achieve in a generation or two if we really got to work. So it's not game over when it comes to things like climate change or any issue in my mind. No, it's game on. It's time for us to be bold. It's time for us to stand tall, work harder than we've ever worked before, and build a future we could be proud of. Be the ancestors that we could be proud to be, and help build that better future for our future generations. To do that, yes, we need to be guided by science. We need to be inspired by dreams of a better future, not just nightmares of a worse one. And we need all of us to step up to be heroes. And maybe borrowing from David Bowie, we can all be heroes even just for one day. All right, with that, I'll stop here and say thank you. And I hope we have some great time for a conversation and questions and some very, very fun conversation here. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was excellent, and definitely inspired a large number of questions in the chat.
Good.
So yeah, it was a very dynamic chat space, which is really excellent. I think the first question that comes up that I want to read is, um, what are the easiest things that we can do? What are your thoughts on fossil fuel divestment, changing banks, buying fewer goods, purchasing from climate-centered circular companies, home solar? But really, the simple question is like, how can we as individuals and as a collection of givers most powerfully allocate our investments in capital to address climate change?
Oh, that's such a great question, and I love how it's already framed because sometimes when we talk about what can I do as an individual, we kind of think we're powerless sometimes. That the only thing we can do, a lot of people think this anyway, is buy the paper straw thing, or maybe once every 4 years we can vote for somebody who says they're going to do something about climate change, and then often fails to do what they promise, and we feel kind of like let down. But you all and all of us have, everyone has some amazing superpowers that maybe we don't recognize. And you've already mentioned a few, but we have our civic life of, being as voters and participants in most of us living in democracies, have some voice in local and regional and national governments. Not just voting, but it's showing up to like committee hearings in your town, your city. A lot of the work, I'm giving US examples, but a lot of the work on climate change in places like the US are at the local level. So the hearings of town halls and city governments, the public utility commissions and zoning boards, these people who you never even hear about. There's about 100 people in America who control a lot of what we do on climate change. None of us have heard of any of them. Those people are really important. They're not elected, they're often appointed by the people we elect. But you can make noise about that and influence this and talk to these people. So I really encourage, much more kind of engaged citizenry, regardless of where you live, is always a good thing. Being aware and talking about these things, that's important. Um, what we do in our homes, yes, that's important too. What we eat, what we buy, how we retrofit and heat and cool our homes, what we drive. Yes, at the point of purchase and the point of, maybe remodeling your home or whatever, these are really good decisions to make about like, hey, I need a new car. Maybe I'll get the electric one this time. Or, hey, I've got to remodel my house, so it's a good time to retrofit. Yeah, or I'm building a new house. Great, let's save you money, build it more comfortable, build it more resilient and adaptation oriented, and reduce emissions. Great, 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 great. This will save you money, make you healthier, and save emissions. But one was mentioned too is where you put your resources, financial resources in particular. Absolutely. It's kind of amazing that when we think about, like, again, I'm thinking of US and European examples, but it's true in other parts of the world too. Often where we bank is kind of not directly emitting greenhouse gases, but it enables the emissions of greenhouse gases. So if I put money into a traditional savings account at a big regular bank, some of that money might be loaned, most of the time it is, to a fossil fuel interest to build more pipelines and more refineries and more wells. That kind of locks in future emissions. But maybe I could, decide not to do that. I can move my money to a bank or a 401k or some kind of investment vehicle that I'm sure you know a lot more about with your financial advisors and so on. That maybe doesn't do that. Where I work, and a lot of places now have retirement plans you can choose that are divested from fossil fuel companies. Great, do that. Some of you might be on boards of things like universities and museums and other places that have endowment funds. You can maybe help to pull that out of fossil fuels. I used to be the CEO of a museum, and our trustees and I did do that. We're the only museum on Earth, I think, to have done so. I almost got fired in the process, but because there were some reasons a lot of people didn't want me to do that. But we did it anyway, and I'm very proud of that. So I think that's really important, the kind of divestment out of things that enable the world to get worse, and maybe investing in things that make it better. So maybe a family office that does philanthropy, the philanthropy clearly can help, but also impact investing, and maybe where people hold their other funds and their family money or retirement or whatever you might have. Great, all good things. So deploying our kind of personal decisions, our civic life, our financial life, all those things are critical. And as Catherine Hayhoe, she's a climate scientist in the US who I think a lot of you know and have heard of, she always says the most important thing to do about climate change is talk about it, to make it more accessible, and talk to neighbors who and friends and community members who aren't already bought into the issue by pointing out, hey, climate solutions create jobs. They help clean the air. They help promote resilience. They help create equity and health and security. And I find that to be a very powerful argument most of the time. Right now, I'm living in a small town in the Midwest that's overwhelmingly voted for Trump, very much a Republican area. And so I used to live in San Francisco, so this is very strange. And so I'm scratching my head sometimes, but I talk about climate change through the lens of jobs and health and security, and have no problem convincing my neighbors, like, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. I like that. But if I talked about a Green New Deal and the EPA coming to take your hamburger, that isn't going to fly. But other things work. So I think talking about these things and kind of depolarizing and kind of finding common ground is also a place we all have some influence. Sorry for the long answer, but it's a really great question. I love it.
I think it's a great answer, and I should say I used to work for an organization that is now lead for cities and communities, and so cities and communities can get certified as sustainable. So really working at that local level and being able to say my city is a sustainable city where we have great jobs and we have, healthy outcomes. It's not just about climate change, but I think creating this dream and this vision of hope is really compelling. So the next question that we have for you is, what are some good courses of actions for small size funders and foundations?
That's a longer conversation. And by the way, I'll just throw out there, if you would like, we do a lot of pro bono work, and a pitch-free zone. I never try to talk about my own organization with philanthropists when they need help in their larger philanthropy. But we actually do a lot of kind of advising with philanthropists and their other advisors, because I think you need three legs to the stool for good philanthropy. Philanthropy starts at the heart. What you care about, what your passions are, even the word philanthropy, the love of of humankind, right? So let's meet you where you are. I would never presume to know the heart of your philanthropy. I'd like to meet you and understand, what are you passionate about? And sometimes it's not climate alone. It may be climate adjacent. Maybe it's something else. And we can maybe show how that connects together for your passions. So first, let's meet people where they are And I can't tell you what that is. You can tell me what that is. But second is the financial tactics. Like, what kind of philanthropy do you find would be most effective tactically? Do you like to fund a project on the ground that's just boots on the ground? If like I'm putting solar panels in this town in Wyoming. Okay, great. Other people might want to fund instead policy work or communications work or kind of something one step removed from a physical project. And maybe another step out might be more kind of, capacity building, helping to do, research or the next generation of leaders or connecting organizations so they can be more effective. Again, that's up to you. I can't give you that advice, and we need all of that. So your heart and your tactics are yours. Where maybe a group like ours can help is then the third leg of the stool is the evidence, the science, like is what you decide to do with your heart and your tactical lens, because a lot of you are really smart investors and business people, and I don't want to second guess you on that stuff. But on the science, like, okay, I know what my heart tells me. I know what kind of project I want to fund. Now, hey, you science geeks, tell me if this actually works. Somebody just pitched me a project to, do carbon capture over here, and I like that. I'm like, well, actually, that may not work so well. That's maybe not the best project, or whatever. So we're just the last part of the due diligence. But start with your heart, then your financial head, and then call a scientist to help double check. Like, does this make sense? And that kind of due diligence is often not being done. There's sometimes due diligence of like the organization you want to fund. Like, is it a legit organization? Do they have you check their financials and 990s news on their board, and do they have an audited financial report and their charity navigator score? Yep. And maybe they got a real shiny pitch deck that looks awesome. Yep, sounds good. But please do ask like a scientist. It'd be like trying to do a health intervention without talking to a doctor. Talk to somebody who knows the science, who has the evidence lens. They might not tell you what to do, but they can tell you what not to do. So we often do that to try to be kind of in the room with you and kind of be a pro bono science advisor to philanthropy. So I can put my email in the chat if anybody wants to follow up later. We have some folks we like to help philanthropy because that's probably the best hour of the week we can possibly spend is help others deploy resources to more effective solutions. And we've been trying to do a lot of that.
That's great. So I have two follow-on questions that relate. One of which somebody says, many economic arguments regarding climate change are attractive, and I'm on board. Yet hidden are unappreciated costs. For example, when we think about EVs, we might not be thinking about the mining for EVs and all of the impacts on the environment that come from that. So how do we know which studies are portraying the most honest picture?
Yeah, that's a great question because there's no free lunch for any technology. There's no source of energy or food or water or anything that doesn't have some environmental trade-off. Of course, the trick is to find the best ones. Um, uh, you know, I'm loath to mention my own organization because obviously that's a bit of a self-serving statement, but that is what we are designed to do at drawdown.org is to be an honest, we are nonpartisan, non-commercial. We are kind of relentlessly independent to the point of kind of ticking off people sometimes. Resource to try to tell you the goods and the bads of climate solutions. Like there are inevitably trade-offs. But there's also some clear answers sometimes too. For example, when it comes to electric vehicles, yeah, electric vehicles have bigger batteries than traditional vehicles, and those batteries take minerals sometimes to make. We're getting a lot better with that over time. There will soon be batteries that don't require them at all. But also recognize that the fossil fuel industry and the car industry has been spreading a lot of nonsense out there about how bad this problem is and trying to make it seem like cobalt is only used in batteries and electric vehicles. Well, that's funny. The biggest use of cobalt is actually in fossil fuel drilling. Cobalt's in the actual drills that they use to go drill this stuff, for example. And also to kind of make it think like somehow electric vehicles invented batteries. That's funny. What the hell is in this then? And in my laptop and in your existing car, the batteries everywhere. So yes, it is adding to a problem we already needed to solve. It is not creating the problem of cobalt and lithium mining at all. We were doing this anyway. And electric vehicles and solar panels and all this are still a minority of the use of those minerals. And the good news about battery technologies, there's lots of other substitutes we can use. So keep the pressure on this, but there's a lot of hype out there making it sound a lot worse than it is. And continuing to burn and drill, refine, ship, and then burn fossil fuels is orders and orders and orders of magnitude more lethal to the world, killing far more people, harming way more people, not to mention climate change, than the problem of mining. Now, I'm not saying mining is not a problem. It is, but it is a problem we can solve if we choose to do so. Burning fossil fuels forever is a problem we can't solve. We just have to stop doing it. And that kind of confusion was deliberate. It's the same old playbook from the fossil fuel companies of trying to create distractions. And somehow the environmental community is really good at the circular kind of finger pointing of like, oh, but it's not perfect, therefore we shouldn't do it, and arguing with itself. You don't see industry doing that. They are deliberately trying to confuse us on issues like that, and that's a well-honed playbook. And I saw it a mile away when that started happening. But we'll see. We'll see. But it is an issue. But rest assured, if you have an EV, it is far, 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 far better for the environment than a traditional gasoline powered car. Go buy the EV. There's no hesitation at all from anyone who really studies this stuff. And could it be better? Yep. But it already is a lot better even today.
Great. This was so fantastic. We really appreciate this. There are, I know, a number of questions that we did not get to, and I wanted to ask if we were able to send some of them to you in a curated fashion, if you'd be willing to follow up with some answers.
Yeah, I can try. Let's see
I-
how long they are, and it might be
exactly.
short and pithy. Don't have time. Sorry, but I'll
Totally.
see what I can do.
So
Absolutely, yeah. If you could send me an email.
yeah, that would be great. And again, thank you. This was a really incredible presentation. And thank you, Tzivia, too, for sharing about the LA fires. And I'll turn it back over to Beth to wrap up.
Thank you so much. Thank you, John and Daniela, for the information and the conversation. I think this has been just incredibly informative and thought-provoking and useful. Thank you for offering yourself as a resource. And there were many more questions, as Daniela said, that we didn't get to. We will try to see if we can get some more answers. And I know Project Drawdown also has lots of resources online that we can share. And thank you all for coming. I hope I wanted to give just quickly a special thanks to Tamara Abrams, who actually brought John Foley to us after a presentation that she helped coordinate. And I'm so pleased that you did. This has been a really valuable hour. And I hope that you all will continue to join us. We will meet again in February. Look for information coming toward you soon. And also at the JFN conference in March in Nashville, we will be gathering. There will be a climate-focused workshop as well as a session hosted by the Jewish Climate Trust talking about their work. Daniela, I don't even know, I'm not even sure you mentioned, Daniela, that you are also involved in the Jewish Climate Trust, as are, I believe, many of you on this call. So I look forward to learning more with all of you and hopefully to seeing you all again next month. Thank you again, and thank you again to Tzivia for sharing some on-the-ground perspective from Los Angeles. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.